Sometimes the hardest battles in life are the ones nobody else can see. Because externally, everything may look normal. You keep smiling, keep working, keep functioning. But internally, something feels heavy. The anxiety increases suddenly. The discouragement grows without explanation. The exhaustion feels deeper than physical tiredness. And maybe the strangest part is this. You cannot fully explain why the pressure feels so intense lately. Why your thoughts feel darker. Why peace feels harder to hold on to. Why temptation feels stronger. And many people assume every battle is merely emotional or psychological. But the Bible reveals something deeper. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, authorities, and powers of this dark world." Not against flesh and blood, meaning some battles affecting your life right now are spiritual, invisible, subtle, yet deeply real. And today I want to show you the invisible battle many people are fighting without even realizing it, and why spiritual warfare often attacks the mind. Identity, peace, and purpose before anything else. Stay with me, because the seventh truth is the one most people overlook completely, while it quietly determines whether they grow spiritually stronger or slowly drift into emotional and spiritual exhaustion. Number 1, the battle often begins in your mind. This is one of the enemy's primary strategies. Why? Because thoughts shape direction. Fearful thoughts create anxiety. Hopeless thoughts create paralysis. Lies create confusion. That's why 2 Corinthians 10:5 says, "Take captive every thought," meaning not every thought entering your mind deserves agreement. And here's what most people never realize. The enemy rarely begins by attacking your circumstances first. He attacks perception. If God loved you, why are you suffering? You'll never change. You're alone. The mind becomes a battlefield. And spiritually mature people eventually understand something powerful. The thoughts you repeatedly entertain eventually shape the atmosphere of your soul. That's why spiritual warfare often feels mental before anything else. Because if peace disappears internally, external life becomes easier to destabilize too. Number 2, the enemy attacks identity before purpose. This pattern appears throughout Scripture repeatedly. Before Jesus began public ministry, Satan attacked identity first. If you are the Son of God, Why? Because confusion about identity weakens spiritual authority. And many believers experience the same battle today. You are not enough. You are a failure. You will never heal. Why? Because insecure people struggle to walk confidently in purpose. 1 Peter 2:9 says, "You are a chosen people," chosen, meaning identity comes from God, not from fear, failure, or emotional wounds. And here's what most people never realize. The enemy wants people emotionally trapped in old identity. The rejected version, the ashamed version, the fearful version. Why? Because people who do not know who they are spiritually become easier to control emotionally. And spiritually mature people eventually realize this. Some of the darkest thoughts attacking your identity right now may not reflect God's truth about you at all. That realization changes everything. Number 3, spiritual battles often increase during transition seasons. This confuses many people because the moment people start growing spiritually, resistance increases. The fear intensifies, the temptation intensifies, the confusion intensifies. Why? Because growth threatens darkness. That's why Jesus faced intense temptation before ministry began. That's why Joseph suffered deeply before elevation happened. And here's what most people never realize. The enemy attacks movement, not stagnation. Because spiritually growing people become dangerous to darkness. Joshua 1:9 says, "Be strong and courageous." Courage becomes necessary during transition. And spiritually mature people eventually understand something powerful. Increased resistance does not always mean you are failing spiritually. Sometimes it means you are moving forward, because darkness rarely attacks people already standing still. Number 4, the invisible battle targets your peace. This happens quietly, little by little. Fear increases, restlessness increases, overthinking increases, and eventually, your inner world feels constantly unstable. John 14:27 says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you." Meaning peace is spiritual protection. And here's what most people never realize. One of the enemy's greatest goals is emotional exhaustion, because exhausted people stop praying consistently, stop thinking clearly, stop resisting temptation effectively. The mind becomes overwhelmed. That's why spiritual warfare often feels like relentless heaviness mentally. Not always dramatic attacks, sometimes simply constant pressure. And spiritually mature people eventually realize this. Protecting peace is not weakness, it is spiritual wisdom. Because a peaceful mind hears God more clearly than a chaotic mind. Number 5, the enemy often isolates people emotionally. This is one of the most dangerous strategies. Because isolated people become vulnerable, the enemy whispers, "Nobody understands you. You should handle this alone. You cannot trust anyone. And slowly, people disconnect emotionally. Ecclesiastes 4:9 says, "Two are better than one." Why? Because isolation weakens resilience. Even Elijah experienced emotional collapse after isolation and exhaustion combined. And here's what most people never realize. The enemy loves secrecy, hidden struggles, hidden shame, hidden fear. Because darkness grows stronger where truth remains hidden. And spiritually mature people eventually understand something powerful. Healing often begins when isolation breaks. That's why confession, community, prayer, and honesty matter deeply spiritually. Because isolation magnifies battles internally. Number 6. Spiritual warfare often disguises itself as normal distraction. This part is subtle. Not every attack looks dramatic. Sometimes it looks like constant distraction. Busyness, numbness, endless entertainment, anything preventing stillness. Why? Because distracted people struggle hearing God clearly. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Stillness threatens distraction, and here's what most people never realize. The enemy does not always need to destroy people completely. Sometimes distraction alone keeps them spiritually weak. Too busy to pray deeply, too distracted to reflect honestly, too emotionally numb to recognize spiritual drift. And spiritually mature people eventually realize this. What constantly consumes your attention eventually shapes your spirit. That's why guarding focus matters deeply, because distraction can quietly weaken spiritual sensitivity over time. Number 7. The invisible battle tries to make you forget God's truth. This is the deepest battle of all, because deception is more dangerous than fear. If the enemy can distort truth, he distorts everything else. That's why Satan repeatedly twists truth throughout Scripture. In Eden, in the wilderness with Jesus, throughout human history, and many believers quietly absorb lies daily. God abandoned you. You'll never change. There's no hope. But John 8:32 says, "The truth will set you free." Truth matters spiritually, because lies create bondage emotionally. And here's what most people never realize. Spiritual warfare often becomes strongest where biblical truth becomes weakest. The less people know God's truth, the easier fear manipulates them. That's why Scripture matters deeply, not as religious routine, as spiritual defense. And spiritually mature people eventually understand something powerful. You cannot consistently win spiritual battles while believing lies about God. Yourself or your future. Truth becomes armor, real armor. Number 8. The battle is trying to shape who you become. This is the deeper layer underneath everything else. Because spiritual warfare is not only about temporary temptation, it is about transformation. Will suffering create bitterness or wisdom? Will fear create paralysis or dependence on God? Romans 8:28 says, "In all things God works for the good of those who love him." Meaning even spiritual battles can become places of growth. Joseph's suffering strengthened character. David's battles strengthened dependence on God. And here's what most people never realize. The enemy may intend destruction, but God can still produce transformation through the battle. That changes perspective completely, because now suffering is no longer meaningless. It becomes refinement. And spiritually mature people eventually realize this. The battle is not only about surviving spiritually, it is about becoming spiritually stronger through dependence on God. Number 9, you are not fighting alone. This is the final truth many people forget during difficult seasons. Because invisible battles feel isolating, the pressure feels personal, the exhaustion feels endless. But Isaiah 41:10 says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. With you, even now. God did not abandon you inside the battle." And here's what most people never realize. Some battles feel invisible because spiritual growth itself is happening invisibly too. Faith is strengthening quietly. Wisdom is strengthening quietly. Discernment is strengthening quietly, even when emotions cannot fully see it yet. And one day, you may realize the invisible battle that almost overwhelmed your mind became the exact season that deepened your faith, sharpened your discernment, and transformed your relationship with God forever. So let's bring this all together. The invisible battle affecting your life may be attacking your mind, identity, peace, relationships, focus, understanding of truth, and spiritual growth itself. Because Ephesians 6:12 still says, "Our struggle is not against flesh and blood." Meaning some of what you are fighting right now is deeper than you realized. And maybe that's what you needed to hear today. The pressure feels heavy. The thoughts feel exhausting. The battle feels lonely. But you are not crazy. You are not abandoned. And you are not fighting alone. Because God still sees every invisible battle happening inside your mind and soul right now. And one day, you may look back at the season where darkness felt strongest and realize it was also the season where God taught you how to fight spiritually, trust deeply, and stand stronger than before. So if this message spoke directly to your spirit today, if you've been feeling intense spiritual or emotional pressure lately, type "God is with me in the battle" in the comments below, because sometimes the greatest victories happen in battles nobody else can see.